Welcome to our presentation on the introduction to evolution and a look at Charles Darwin's life. Charles Robert Darwin was born in 1809, Shrewsbury, England. He was an English person, the fifth child of a wealthy, sophisticated English family. His education, graduated from Shrewsbury, sort of a high school. The dates are only interesting because you get a frame of reference of the time period, pre-Civil War, post-War of 1812. Started off studying medicine at Edinburgh, but he dropped out before graduating. Didn't find it a very appealing subject to study. His father was a physician of sorts and sent him away to follow in his footsteps, but he was more interested in natural science than medicine. Then he was sent to Cambridge to prepare to become a clergyman studying theology. I find it interesting that Darwin graduated from Cambridge with a degree in theology to become a minister. But he showed an interest alike in science. He was influenced by Adam Sedgwick, a geologist, and Henslow, a naturalist, while at Cambridge, showing him some things about the world that he hadn't been exposed to before. He graduated from Cambridge in 1831, degree in ministry. Then he negotiated with his father and with some financial aid from an uncle, became a naturalist, an unpaid naturalist on the HMS Beagle, which was a ship of exploration sent out by the British government. HMS means His Majesty's ship. He, age 22, he's newly graduated from college, but before he started in his life of being a minister, running a congregation, he got to go on one excellent adventure, I call it. So he's an unpaid naturalist upon the Beagle, where he would make observations, collect specimens as they went around the world. Not all the way around the world, but they were exploring the east coast of South America, which was little explored, little known side of the South American continent. So again, they explored the oceans and the area off South America in the South Pacific. As a naturalist, he was able to observe geological formations, fossils, living organisms on continents and islands along the way. They kind of hopped the coastline, sailed out to see if there were any islands out there. They were kind of looking for places for the British Navy to resupply fresh water. Where are their ports? What kind of animals are there? Dangerous, friendly, good to eat, bad to eat, that kind of a thing. Kind of charting out the west coast of South America. He was impressed with the effects of natural forces on the earth. He saw a lot of volcanic activity, islands that had formed in the last few thousand years, well before the creation idea. So how could these islands have certain kinds of life unique to them and not found anywhere else in the world on these islands that weren't there when the earth was formed? Got thinking about things that the Bible said, then his observations, they just didn't hold up to what the Bible said. The Bible couldn't explain how some of the things happened. One of the big areas that he saw that he made connections on were the Galapagos Islands, about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. There's life on this island, birds, iguanas, tortoises that are found nowhere else on the earth, but are somewhat similar, especially the finches, which we'll cover in another presentation. The finches were in some ways, extremely similar to birds on the mainland of South America, but out here on these islands, they had formed slightly different features and were different species. Noted each island is supported by its own form of animal and plant life. Not only the finches, but the tortoises all had unique shells to their own island. They were closely related yet different from island to island and found nowhere else on the earth. Some of the influences on Darwin: he developed his ideas about the changeability of species while on the voyage, partly due to the fact that he had read the Bible and it did not square with the voyages or what he was observing on his voyages. He had a lot of time, too, on these voyages. He didn't have duties, so he was able to write, think, read. He read some books from Thomas Malthus, a British economist, who argued that human population remains in balance with its food supply. And if the population ever increases, a couple of factors will knock it back down. War, killing over the food supply, over resources. If that isn't it, sometimes with a starvation and that, you get famine and disease, which will knock a population down, plagues, that kind of a thing. So he thought about that, and it got him thinking, well, if that's the case with humans, why wouldn't it be also the case with animals? Whether you're a predator or a herbivore, then your population is closely tied to your food supply. What happens when it exceeds it? Animals don't seem to have war, but what keeps their numbers in check? So he started to develop a theory about this. Upon returning to England in 1836, he began recording his explanations. He began giving speeches and about his findings, the Royal Academy and other people in London. He started to develop his theory of evolution in 22 years after returning from the Galapagos. It didn't come out right away. He developed it, thought about it, refined it, read about things and refined it. And it took him 22 years before he actually published it. And one of the things he looked at was the study of artificial selection, the idea that horses, dogs, cattle, chickens, there are no white chickens in nature. Where did white chickens come from? Dogs are all really the same species as a wolf. Where did the pugs and the large dogs, the St. Bernards and the Beagles and all the dogs in between, where did they come from? Artificial selection, people selecting. Well, if people can select and change things, why can't nature also select traits that is advantageous to that nature, to that environment? So he started coming up with the theory of natural selection, nature selecting certain traits that are advantageous to that environment. And one of the key things here is the environment in the earth is always changing. Deserts become oceans, oceans become deserts, mountains rise and fall. Millions and millions and millions of years go by and things change. As these things slowly change, there's different pressures, there's different selection pressures on traits. Darwin believed there's a force at work that similar to artificial selection, but it was natural. Darwin's theory was that natural selection was the mechanism for change in populations. Certain variations survive, reproduce, and get passed on, and others don't. Others are lost. Malthus and Darwin, not versus really, but Malthus believed that available food supply was an influence on the population, especially in humans. Darwin believed each subsequent generation would have a favorable natural variation influenced by their surroundings. So again, if food is your getting food, keeping food, catching food, not becoming food, if you're a herbivore, if you have traits that are a little bit better, if you're a giraffe and your neck is just naturally a little bit longer, you can glean a few more leaves high up in the tree once every 10 years or so. That subgroup of the population, because they get a little bit more nutrients in the bad times, harsh times, might have one baby that survives every 10 years, maybe more than the others. But over thousands of years of that going on, you start to have the trait of a little bit longer neck, a little bit longer legs becoming selected for, and the population starts to have longer legs and longer necks. Interestingly, he stepped onto the HMS Beagle, a new graduate of divinity education, to become educated to become a minister upon his return. 5 years later, due to many observations, collections, and measurements, he stepped off that ship with the beginning ideas of natural selection, which is the mechanism of evolution.